Thank you very much. Just before I start, I will say that I've got at least one board director on the call from Stratford, so that's Councillor Taylor, who's the town council representative. And just to say that some of what I'm about to say is are actually my views rather than those of the company. There will be some that will agree with me, some of my board members and some of the bid members that will agree with me, and others that wouldn't. So it's not enough, if you like, an official company view, but I just wanted to make that clear before we went on. So thank you very much. Now. What I was going to talk to you about is where we are, what's happened over the last year, threats to the town centre, and also the potential solutions that we've got. And it's not going to be an exhaustive list. And what's happened over the last year, I did say it'd be a short summary, but actually there is a lot that's happened. So 2021, in terms of where we are now, and apologies to the Daily Telegraph for stealing 2 mapped cartoons, we're obviously in our 3rd full lockdown. We've got the vaccines, the 3 vaccines are being rolled out alongside new virus variants. We've got the implementation of Brexit. We can't get away from it, it's happened. But layered on top of all of those things, we have questions about ongoing business viability for particularly those in the retail, leisure and hospitality sectors. Massive amounts of debt, both nationally and also with companies. And then rising unemployment, although some of that is being disguised by the continuation of the furlough scheme. So in terms of the business viability elements, in terms of where we are, I mean, there's still a heavy burden of costs that's sat with a lot of businesses who are unable to open. The changes in the furlough scheme means that a lot of those businesses are picking up national insurance costs and pension contributions, but there's no new grants for this lockdown, which means that we've got a lot of businesses that are not as viable as they should be, and these were businesses that were supported in the first lockdown with government grants and a more generous furlough scheme. The country's, I suppose, the country's national debt is now a sort of 100% or 100.5% of GDP. So that's another 320 odd billion pounds worth of borrowing that took place last year. Part of that is government-backed business loans, the bounce-back loans up to £50,000, and there was £43 billion worth of government-secured business debt that was loaned last year. Effectively, what they're expecting is that anywhere between 15 and 26 billion of that is going to get written off in either business failures or actually non-payment of those debts. So there are already, in terms of expectations, 2021 is going to be potentially tougher than last year, there are serious issues in terms of the business community and what they face going forward. I think that's the face about what happened over the last year, and it's where to start, really. I'll share some charts that are both from Stratford, from the ONS, and various other organisations. This is last year's footfall, which shows that at the beginning of the year, which is not January and February and March of 2020 were not particularly good. We started to see a drop off in international visitors and some changes in the economy, but it just showed, that's a normal pattern. Spikes at the weekend. Anytime there was good weather in there will have been things. Increased visitors. And here's lockdown. And then basically we haven't really recovered from there. You can see in this July, August, September period when we had good weather, and also things like Eat Out to Help Out, that actually numbers were getting back towards what we might consider normality. And then again, they've dropped off the edge of a cliff and are really bumping along the bottom at the moment. These are values of sales that are from February to August of last year. The one on the left is actually in-store sales. The graph on the right is actually online. So you can see that only food and household goods actually recovered back to about their level in in-store sales. But over on this side, this chart on the online side, you can see that you know, online has taken off massively and has not really given up that growth that it saw, certainly to the August period of last year. This is a 2019-2020 comparison, again, March and August. And hopefully what you can see there is that 2019 is the blue, 2020 is the orange. And for all sort of metrics there, online in 2020 is effectively almost, you know, all the increases are in online, all the decreases are in store, except for non-store retailing. But so it really is it's a proper challenge in terms of what our physical stores who don't trade online have been facing. And certainly what we found is a company that we use reported that independent businesses during the period of lockdown, or the first lockdown of the pandemic, their social media activity went from about 50% of them posting regularly, i.e. every day, to just over 20% of them posting regularly every day, which, when a town centre is shut and you're looking for things online, that meant that a lot of those businesses disappeared as far as the customers were concerned. Two more horror story graphs, really. This is food and beverage on the right hand side here. Left hand side is sort of services, output, construction, manufacturing, but this one is the most interesting because it shows the massive drop-off that occurred as we entered lockdown, as effectively the Prime Minister said, the pubs and restaurants are open, but please don't go out. And then we entered full lockdown. And then you can see again the November drop-off on this side here, where again that downward graph. So these are businesses that employ quite a lot of people, but are reliant on people physically being in them. A bit more of a highlight. John Lewis every year, I say highlight, but it's more fun, I suppose. They produce an annual report about how we shop, how we look, how we live, and they essentially track that, produce an annual report every year. So it'll come as no surprise to you that fitness trackers saw an increase in sales, coffee machines increase in sales, and TVs and projectors, and that things like lipstick saw a reduction in sales, but mascara actually saw a sales lift. And John Lewis have identified that as well. If you're wearing a face mask, no one can see your lipstick, but everyone can see your eyes. So that's what people bought. And it's a large portion of things like high heels, but also general elements of workwear and fashion ceased to be big sellers, and obviously everyone embraced casual during 2020. I suppose to try and give put us in context of where we are, this is a graph of retail company failures in England over since 2007 up until this year. What we're seeing here is that in 2008, 2008 was a significant period of company failures with a large amount of unemployment. 2020, in terms of number of stores and companies affected, outpaced even 2008 with the banking crisis. So what we're looking at is a real shift and a real sort of end point, if you like, for this particular trend. That if you see 2018, 2019, you saw two particularly bad years for numbers of employees affected leaving retail as companies failed. So both 46,000 apiece. Those are led up to and were capped off, if you like, by 2020, which is an indicator of what we face as a whole and also as a town. That's a great list. Oh, it's not a great list actually. It's a list of company administrations and store closures over the last couple of years. There are a number. It's too small for you to see. I just thought it was, when you put them together, there's a lot in there. Some of those businesses effectively went bust twice over the 2 years. LK Bennett's in there twice, Debenhams are in there twice, and there's a number of others, but probably one of the big ones was Into Properties, who own shopping centres and managed shopping centres, and who went down with £4.5 billion worth of debt towards the tail end of last year. So again, I suppose it's showing a pattern of where we're heading. Going back to John Lewis's report, what's to come? Well, a baby boom apparently, and we're going to be more, I suppose, invested in the planet and care more about quality and ethics. So, what's next after the quick run through of the horror story that was last year? There's a great KPMG report which makes a number of, if you like, predictions. The pandemic did accelerate online shopping, so it's now gone from, it went from 20% of retail sales at the beginning of 2020 to about 30% now. Working from home is the new normal, but actually, they say, and I've been championing this for a little while, is that companies will need physical space, but what they may end up doing is devolving their physical space not into big office blocks like you see in Birmingham, in Colmore Row or wherever, but they may have more local pods of offices, and those are, as KPMG, their head of real estate is saying, it's about collaboration, creativity and culture. So for a town like Stratford, where we have a large proportion of, I suppose, high-end jobs, we could see more people working from home but needing space to collaborate. So I see a real potential there for the town because of the makeup of our residents. That same KPMG report says that between 1 in 5, or in some places 1 in 2 jobs in retail could be affected by this, and those are massive numbers. But the takeaway from that is that retail and shopping won't dominate the high street as it has certainly in the past, but that we have to look more at a variety and a range. And I think Bridge Street is perhaps a prime example of where retail has dominated, aided and abetted by the planning system because of retail frontage policies, and also the higher rents, but where you have seen increasing numbers of business failures create quite significant gaps in that environment, and Bridge Street remained quite a big challenge. KPMG, I think, and we're already seeing this from the likes of Blue Coast Capital, who also manage Bell Court. Rents will fall because supply will exceed demand for certainly for retail. Valuations are going to reduce for those properties. Interestingly, Brexit has caused both a boom in warehousing because of stockpiling, as did the pandemic, and certainly retail, hospitality and leisure, retail except supermarkets, hospitality and leisure will see a fall in rents, and those will affect the valuations of the building. Leases are going to be more and more less about the institutional lease. You know, so many premises became available in the last recession, 2008, simply because their institutional 25-year leases were coming to an end at that point and people were moving around. So those all represent real opportunities, if you like, for change in the town centre. One of our local commercial agents is working on a project in Stratford town centre, where he's looked at the entire building of a number of buildings in the town centre, looked at how much residential or other uses you could get at upper stories, and by investing in the upper story conversions, actually managing to drop the rents at ground floor but maintain the value of the whole building. So I think we're going to see more investment like that in the town centre happening, and more changes like that. So I suppose that was a longer run through than I'd intended about what's happened. Where are our threats? I think I would have said up until the pandemic that complacency was potentially one of the biggest threats that Stratford faced. The streets aren't paved with gold, and yet when you see how busy Stratford can be on a sunny day, people come here and expect to be able to make an absolute fortune, but the season is getting shorter. I think there are other elements, the lack of a comprehensive vision for what Stratford is and what it will be, the fact that we don't necessarily have a story to tell about the town, about why someone should invest or even stay here. The planning system, the changes in the use class order, you'll already be aware as the Stratford Society are going to start to really shake up how the town will work, because under the use class order changes, I can change a shop to a cafe and it's not classed as development. So there is nothing that the retail frontage policies in the core strategy or the NDP can do about that. And so I think that's going to have quite a big impact. Brexit will obviously have an impact. Tourists, certainly our international tourists and visitors, have tended to have a higher spend. They tend to stay longer, so they will be utilising restaurants, hotels, and also spending more while they're here. But also Brexit's having a much bigger impact in terms of hospitality, in terms of their staffing. I suppose we're perhaps fortunate that that we haven't that Brexit has happened when the economy is suppressed, but a lot of our hospitality industry was staffed by Europeans, non-British nationals, if you like. I've written a finance-driven decisions because I think that a threat to us as a town is that sometimes businesses or other organisations will make decisions based on what money they need to raise or what money they need to save, and those may not be in the best interests of Stratford longer term. And I think we have, threats to disinvestment simply because people perhaps don't understand where we're heading. I suppose threats or constraints I wrote here because I'd said the historic the historic street layout is not a threat, but it is a constraint to how we can move forward. But it's one that is a key asset going forward, but still has some things that we need to negotiate as a town. I said that the streets aren't paved with gold, but there are a number of businesses in town that are up for sale. If you go onto any of the business selling websites, you'll historically a lot of businesses in Stratford have been overvalued, and actually what are they actually worth? And they're only worth what someone's willing to pay for them. And I think that's in the past perhaps people have overpaid, and that's also causing some issues and threats in the town that will play out over the next 2 or 3 years. So in terms of I suppose what's next, my view is that the next 5 years really we're in a period of extensive change, and we need to be realistic. We can't wail and hold our arms up or hands up and just say this is terrible, because actually what we're witnessing now, aside from the pandemic impacts, the seeds of where we are were sown a number of years ago, and actually I suppose the pigeons are coming home to roost. But there are I think there has been some really encouraging signs over the last year. I said to a number of people that I work with that Moore Bakery in Belcourt was I think a very brave decision by the guys there, but actually the Moore Bakery was going to be the canary in the coal mine about whether Stratford people still really did believe in their town centre. And I know that sounds really odd, but I think the fact is that they thrived. They opened a week before lockdown or 2 weeks before lockdown, and they thrived during that first lockdown, and people have become very, very loyal. And I think that's a really good sign for Stratford. Likewise, you've got things like the Henley Street scheme, which people may like it or hate it, but it is of a standard. It is of quality materials and addresses some of the issues that we were facing. So, I mean, I suppose, the solutions, I think, for Stratford about what's next, I think we have to be more unified as a town, more unified as organisations going forward, and that means greater partnerships where people understand each other's opinion. I think we need to understand the change that's happening, perhaps explain it to those that don't necessarily understand or want to understand it. And I think we've got to embrace that change, because it's happening regardless of whether we like it or not. And then really it's having a vision and a plan about how we're going to guide that change. I do think we need to think differently. I think we need to aim to be brilliant, and I think we need to champion quality. And they seem very broad things, but I think once you lay out actually what are we going to be, well, we're going to be great. We're going to be as good as, I don't know, the best production at the RSC as a town, because you look at how I suppose the RSC is something where we see it's one of our USPs as a town, but it is one of the things where it doesn't sit in isolation. It is part of the town, and the town doesn't always rise to the challenge that's presented to it by perhaps some of our occupiers. So I think placemaking is really where we need to be, but selling the story of the town and those changes that need to happen in a coherent way, that does mean picking a direction, regardless of whether we necessarily agree with it or not. I think good design does cost nothing. It doesn't cost any more than actually the design process itself. I think there is a danger going forward that as money reduces, that quality or standards will slip, and I think that's something that Stratford has always had. It's always had a leverage over the quality of development, and it should resist losing that. I think we should do it well. You know, the good quality urbanism, and we need to be aware that we can't change everything overnight, but that if we've got a plan, we can keep moving forward, and people can keep moving forward together. Now, I realise for a lot of people, the NDP is part of that, and the core strategy is part of that, but it doesn't fully do the job of selling the story, giving a business like M&S, who may have question marks over what are their decision-making processes going to be in the next 5 years about whether they invest more at the Maybird or actually in continue to invest in the town centre. We've got to give them certainty that they will make a decision, that if they make the decision to stay in the town centre, they are making the right decision. So I think there are a number of things in that, and tools and techniques that we could use include there's a great company who have done a lot of work around the UK called Create Streets. So if you bear with me, there we are. And essentially it's a number of you may well have dealt with Planning for Real many years ago, who used to use massive tabletops and people with post-it notes, but this is effectively a real-time mobile-based Planning for Real document. So you can get improvement suggestions from your whole community, from those people who might not come into Stratford. Why don't you come into Stratford? Well, I don't like this particular crossing. And you know, if that turns out to be a problem, you can use that to form your plan. So I think we need to be better at understanding how people use our town, and organisations like Create Streets are great to try and do that, because we really do need to understand what it is that we have and how people use it, because we all use a town differently, and we all have different views about how the town sort of works. And I talked about a plan and a route forward. COVID brought into play, this is the Institute of Place Management's COVID recovery framework, the model, and it's a sort of a standard model that lots of places have adopted. But because COVID has been so long, third lockdown, we go through the cycle of up and down and crisis and not crisis. Are we in pre-recovery? We're in recovery, or are we in transformation? Actually, we need to go back to the elements of this as a town and with organisations to actually say, how do we do this? You know, what do we need to do again? about, you know, telling the story, how we deal with the funding and investment and create those really strong partnerships which will resist the fractures that happen quite often when you have disagreements on views or differing priorities. We have to be better as a town at having not one opinion or one vision or one, at least one direction where we're all heading in the same way, and actually that is something that is probably our first priority. That's the first route to delivering you know, a Stratford that will survive and thrive, and I think that's really where I think, you know, the real work starts, is in building or rebuilding those strong partnerships, and partnerships across organisations who might not necessarily always agree or have differing agendas. So that was me. Sorry.